Hello friends, it's Father Archer here, and welcome to your February Virtue video. The virtue that we focus on this month is the virtue of prudence. And to get after this virtue, I want to begin by telling you a story of two saints. Sometimes we may be tempted to think all the saints would do exactly the same thing in the same circumstance, but that's really not always the case. Saints can be very different from each other while also being very holy. And so there's this great story of two saints who lived around the same time, Saint Damien of Malachi and Saint Marianne Cope. Both saints are famous for ministering to lepers. Saint Damien, as you may know, went to the island of Malachi, which was a leper colony. And the men and women on this island were completely abandoned by society. Even for their food, people would sail by in ships, but they wouldn't even land on the island, and they would throw the packages of food to the lepers on the island. And so the lepers felt completely abandoned, unwanted, and unloved. And so what Saint Damien felt called to do is to go and live with the lepers. So Saint Damien landed on the island of Malachi, and he cared for them, and he lived with them. Of course, eventually, Saint Damien himself contracted the disease, and he died of leprosy. And so we can call Saint Damien a martyr of charity, that it's through his love that led to his death, in identifying himself with the lepers. There's of course a beautiful image in this as well, of how he is so similar to Jesus in doing this. That Jesus, of course, could have remained simply as God. He didn't have to become human, but Jesus freely chose to become a man, to take on our human flesh, knowing that this would lead to his death. And so Saint Damien, like Jesus, identified himself with those who are the outcasts and gave his life for them. So Saint Damien is a beautiful saint who lived that heroic witness of charity in his life. But another great saint who lived around the same time was Saint Marianne Cope, and she illustrates very well the virtue of prudence. Saint Marianne Cope likewise ministered to lepers, and she cared for people with this very contagious disease. But she did so a little bit differently. Instead of moving in with the lepers and identifying and living with them in every facet of their life, she would care for them, but she continued living a little bit separately from them, not in the same place. And she was always very careful with hygiene. She'd be sure to wear a mask, perhaps to wash her hands before and after interacting with them, so that she wouldn't contract the disease herself. And so Saint Marianne, in the end, was able to minister to the lepers for a very long time. Over 20 years, she was able to carry out this important ministry. And eventually she died of old age, and she never actually contracted leprosy herself. And so Saint Marianne, in a very nice way, illustrates the virtue of prudence. That of course it was a good, heroic, and beautiful thing for Saint Damien to go and to live with the lepers, to identify himself with them, and to give his life for them. But it was also a good, heroic, and beautiful thing for Saint Marianne to care for the lepers for all those years, to show them her love, her charity, and yet at the same time taking those precautions to make sure that she herself did not grow sick. And so for us, one important virtue is the virtue of prudence. The virtue of prudence is when we use our mind, we use our reason, to consider what in fact would be best for me to do. And Saint Damien came to the conclusion that God was inviting him to go to live with the lepers to give his life. Saint Marianne came to the conclusion that God was calling her to go and to care for them, but in a way that had the proper precautions so she herself would not get sick. And so for us in our ordinary lives, we often have to use this virtue of prudence. And parents are especially good at helping us navigate this virtue. And so sometimes it's important that perhaps we do our homework right away after school. That we finish our classes, we do our homework before we go and do other things. At other times, perhaps you have some homework, but you're so hungry you know you won't be able to focus until you first have a snack or lunch. So sometimes maybe you say, I think it would be more prudent if I go and I have a snack and then I do my homework, so that I can do so and I won't be crabby. And so we often have to grow in self-awareness in order to live this virtue of prudence well. So that each day we pray, and each day we're also considering what would be the best course of action for me to take so that I can do the most good and be the most loving person that God has called me to be. Colby Academy, stay close to Jesus this month. God bless you.